Welcome to the Recovery Stories podcast, bringing you stories of hope, healing, and triumph over the bondage of addictions, mental health struggles, trauma, and dysfunctional family systems. Our courageous storytellers have chosen to live their journey out loud in order to show others that they don't have to suffer in silence. The stories you will hear are raw, real, and may involve graphic and triggering content. This podcast is brought to you by Promises Behavioral Health's Rooted alumni community. If you or a loved one are struggling, have questions, or are ready to take the next step, call our admission center at 888-648-4098. Or visit us online at www.promisesbehavioralhealth.com. Our team is ready and waiting to answer the call for help.
Hello and welcome to this episode of Rooted Recovery Stories. My name is Patrick Custer and I'm your host. We are so glad that you're here and are joining us either live or on replay. And before we get into introducing our special guest I'm so excited to tell you all about, I just want to remind everyone that we put this podcast together. We don't make money off of it. It's free of charge as a service to people in the community, the recovery community, or the potential recovery community. And so if you would give us a like or a follow or a comment, any of those things help perpetuate the platform that we're hoping to spread the message of recovery. So we would appreciate that. And without further ado, I'm so excited to introduce to you all one of the founders of a wonderful program called She Recovers, a recovering person herself, Dawn Nickel. Thank you so much for being here with us today.
Oh, Patrick, I'm delighted to be here, and thank you. And thanks to everybody at Promises for all the wonderful work that you do. You know, we've been friends or, connected or partners or collaborators for a number of years now, and you just have an extraordinary team. Although I will say, and you're the first male person on the team that I've met in the past 3 years. I love any organizations that's kind of top heavy with women. So I love it, but I'm glad
I love
they
it
are
too.
Inclusive.
I love working with women, and this is one of the things that I love about Promises is that we have a lot of female leadership. It's the first company that I've worked for where I felt like the scales were balanced a lot more, and it's been very inspiring. Some of the most inspirational people in my life and influential people in my life and development have been women, and so I am so happy to be surrounded by, especially on the marketing team. I'm one of the very few men, and I'm perfectly happy with it. So
awesome.
So I wanted to kick things off today a little bit different. Normally we dive right into somebody's story, but I want to highlight on the front end and talk about She Recovers. There's so much to share, and I don't even know what specifically to ask you about because y'all are doing so many good things. But however you'd like to share about the really awesome things you're doing, when it was founded, your vision, all those things about She Recovers, I'd love to talk about that first.
Sure. I mean, it's a little bit inside out from how I usually tell the story because my recovery and my daughter's recovery, my daughter is the other founder, really kind of did lead up to the establishment of She Recovers as it was 10 years ago. But I can do this too. So 10 years ago in, in about June 2011, I hit the wall with workaholism. I was already several decades into recovery from substance use disorder, intimate partner violence, anxiety, mental health issues, trauma, and workaholism just kicked my butt. And I ended up on a 4-month leave from the 3 careers that I was doing at the time. I was teaching at the university. I was a consultant, and I was also working within government as a director of research for a large in-government shop. And when I hit the wall, I had 4 months to kind of reflect on the question that I'd asked myself several decades previously when I first went into a treatment program, which was, why am I trying to kill myself? Like, why am I not taking care of myself? What am I hiding from? What am I numbing from? What the heck is happening here? And so I took 4 months to just kind of regroup, reconnect with my recovery, something that had been sliding, for some time. It was replaced with my workaholism. Had a chance to reflect on the relationships in my family, including with my daughter, my 2 daughters, but my youngest daughter, who's now a co-founder of our foundation. And I realized that I had just been in a place where life had gotten really busy. My daughter at a younger age had ended up addicted, and that kind of took 1.5 years out of our family's life to kind of deal with that. My mom got leukemia. She was terminally ill for almost 2 years, and then she died. I was doing a Ph.D. after, at the end of many years in university. I actually ended up going for 13 years. So I got used to
Wow.
being really busy.
Yeah.
And then when my mom passed away, I needed to numb that. So I just continued really forging forward, finished my PhD in record time, started working, felt behind financially and career-wise. So decided I would have 3 full-time careers. And it was just crazy. But I could see, with some help of a therapist, as always, I could see very quickly that, yeah, I had been numbing. That's what the work was about.
Mhm.
That's even what hiding in school had been about in part. And that if I was going to survive, I'd also had cancer in there, my own. I almost died from cancer myself in there, like just a few
Wow.
years previous to the workaholism breakdown. So I knew that I had to do things different. And fortunately for me, having been in recovery since 1987, I knew what I needed to do. I just needed to go back to basics. I needed to get in touch with my recovery program at the time, which was a 12-step recovery program. I'm a huge advocate for 12-step recovery, although I recognize it doesn't work for everyone. And to be perfectly transparent, 12-step recovery has become less. I've become less involved in 12-step programs and fellowships in this last 10 years. I just like to say She Recovers takes up all of my recovery time
Yeah.
and every other minute of every day. So yeah, I just kind of settled in and thought, what do I want to do here with my life? What I'd really like to do is figure out how other women are recovering. I'd like to start a conversation about how we're all recovering from something, regardless of if it's my cocaine addiction or my anxiety or my grief over losing my mother, my workaholism. I just really wanted to have a conversation about how we are all in recovery from something, and we need to be supported to find and follow individualized pathways and patchworks of recovery. I also learned, started to focus on the idea that regardless of what we think we're in recovery from initially, when we kind of come to step into the journey, we're all so very much alike. And most of us can trace back our dysfunctional behavior or addictions to something that happened in childhood, often childhood trauma, adverse childhood experiences, etc. So just kind of have this loosely formed conversation that I wanted to have. And I started having it on a blog called Recovering Dawn during those 4 months, and really, really was inspired to see so many women connect with the blog and talk to me about, yeah, like I've never had a drug problem, but I'm addicted to sex, or I'm addicted to love, and just kind of opened up the conversation. And at the end of 4 months, I was ready to go back to work. I stopped teaching at the university and I gave up my consulting job, and I went just back into my one full-time job in government. And after about 4 months back at work, the universe delivered this beautiful gift. It didn't feel like it at the time. It felt like a rejection. Go figure. But my research unit was dissolved because of the downturn in the economy, and I was given a year severance, which was beautiful. And I got to go away and spend another year thinking about what do I really want to do and who do I want to be for this next chapter of my life. And I determined through the blog that I've been writing that I really wanted to work in the area of women and recovery. Having spent 13 years in university and coming out with a PhD in healthcare policy, focusing a lot on gender and caregiving, I didn't want to go back to school to become a counselor, and I decided I would become a recovery coach. And I took a year-long recovery coach, certified professional recovery coach program during my year of severance and my year off. And we had started a Facebook page called She Recovers during that time. And so we were continuing the conversation. We were talking with women, and my youngest daughter, who had been in and out a little bit of recovery, but was really quite firm in her recovery at the time, Taryn. She's also a yoga teacher and a trauma-informed yoga teacher. So in 2012, we decided we would host a retreat. So now we had a Facebook page and one little retreat on the beach in Tulum, Mexico at the end of 2012. And that was just really the start of it. The retreat was very successful. I was doing a little bit of coaching. I did go back to a career. I went back to consulting, but I was kind of part-time consulting and really trying to figure out what the She Recovers thing was going to be about with Taryn. And it really just turned into a Facebook page, a community, and retreats. So we did retreats up until about 2016. when we realized that we needed to do more, we wanted to grow She Recovers, we decided we would do a big conference in New York City.
Wow.
So we held a beautiful conference in May 2017 in downtown Manhattan. Marianne Williamson, Gabby Bernstein, Glennon Doyle, and Elizabeth Vargas from 2020 were our keynotes. We always joke and say, like, we blew the budget. It was incredibly insane. It was our first one. We didn't really know what we were doing. We're like, we'll have her. We invited all four of them to come and be a keynote speaker, thinking one would maybe say yes, and all four said yes. And then we couldn't say, well, no, we rescind that invitation. Legally, we couldn't even. I guess I didn't really realize that a firm offer, when we put in a firm offer, it's really a firm offer. So it was very successful. Around that same time, we launched the She Recovers Coach Designation Program, where we have therapists and other professionals in the addictions field and the behavioral health field who can take a 10-hour designation to become a She Recovers coach, other recovery coaches, etc. So that was happening. The conference was happening. We did another conference in 2018. And we were just kind of moving right along. We started a Facebook group in 2018, and it just became a place where we had more kind of community connections with women and other non-binary individuals who identify with women's communities. But we weren't really doing much online other than Taryn was doing some yoga online, and we had the Facebook groups. But of course, it wasn't until March 2020 that we realized we needed to do something different. So by March 2020, we had about 100 She Recovers coaches. Wow. They were hosting She Recovers sharing circles once a month in communities across North America and beyond, like in Sydney, Australia, in Paris. And everything stopped. All of a sudden we were just really getting going on the in-person idea and building out. We were building towards creating chapters in cities. I think there was 25 cities across the US, about 6 or 7 in Canada, and then the others were elsewhere in the world. And in March, we realized, okay, we can't do that. We had done another conference in LA, She Recovers in LA, in 2018. It was amazing, at the Beverly Hilton. We had planned to do She Recovers in Miami at the Biltmore last May 2020. So that got canceled. The 10 retreats we had planned for the year got canceled. All of our sharing circles got shut down. We had done a tour in 2019 called the Creating Connections Tour, where we went around to 6 different cities in North America, 5 in the US and Toronto. And excuse me, everything was just done. Now what do we do? We have no revenue. We have nothing. Like, what are we even going to do other than our online coaching program? So we determined that we needed to hop online and see if we could start hosting meetings, which we'd always said, we should do online meetings, but then I would say, no, people can go to In the Rooms. They've got everything they need there. And In the Rooms is a wonderful, wonderful platform. Mm-hmm. For those of you who don't know it, look it up. It's intherooms.com. But we decided we had something different and we were going to hop on and start offering meetings. And so we did that. And so we've been hosting meetings twice a day, every day since March 17th. As things evolved, we realized there were some other needs. And so we've now got, on the weekends, there's a weekly meeting for Black, Indigenous, and women of color. We have another one for LGBTQ+, another one for healthcare professionals, certainly a group that was really needing extra support in the beginning and throughout this pandemic. We have one for legal professionals and another meeting for mothers of high needs children, many children across on the autism spectrum.
Wow. So, what a great, I can see how that would be such a needed specific group.
Yeah, it's incredible. It's really incredible. So it's just, we've kind of evolved into this. We're still doing coaching. We started, we had done one in-person yoga teacher training with certified yoga teachers. They can become a trauma-informed yoga teacher, which She Recovers. That went online. Our meetings went online. And we were still a business, but we were a business without any revenues in front of us. Yeah. So, there was a time at the beginning of last March where we were like, this might be the end. We were, as an organization, we were like just poised to deliver the greatest support and to continue to grow. And, we realized that we have no revenue streams. So coincidentally or not, the universe delivers. On April 6th, 2020, just a few weeks after we switched to online and we were, in the process of figuring out what we were going to do, we received our 501c3 charitable designation from the IRS, something that we had applied for 18 months previously, when we actually thought the model was going to be, we were going to be so successful financially, we'd need a foundation to figure out, so that we could help more people. And now we were actually pivoting to depend on this charitable nonprofit status to sustain us. And so good timing. We've just continued along. And then last year, we've added so many things to our offerings. We do a Mental Health Monday program. So every Monday for an hour, we invite clinicians and other experts to talk about various mental health issues. We received a wonderful grant from Alkermes Pharmaceuticals to continue to run that program. We've formed a partnership with BetterHelp.com so that anybody in our community, or anybody who even just accesses the link, can receive 35% off of their first month of online therapy, which is already so affordable.
Wow.
And we just continue to develop partnerships with wonderful companies. Promises is been signed up to be a sponsor for She Recovers in Miami, which is finally going to happen next April.
Yay!
So we've just, we've built our team out. And as that's happened, personally, myself and my daughter, Taryn, have actually kind of receded from the day-to-day of the organization. We're both founders. I'm board chair. She's vice chair. She's got her own platform and her own coaching program. I've returned to consulting. I do a lot of consulting in the area of mental health and addictions. But of course, we're still very involved strategically, and we still take every opportunity we can like this to talk to people about the foundation, because we believe in it so deeply. We just really believe that as a grassroots organization, as a nonprofit, it needs to we need to step back to give it some breath, some breathing room to grow and to be driven by the community and the volunteers and some new people who've come onto our team who are have a lot more expertise, including in marketing and development and fundraising and all of those things. So it's been a journey.
That's awesome. And I'm excited to see how, when, fingers crossed, over this next year, and we get to see, our country, the world recover from, all the ways that Corona has affected everything. And just how y'all continue to flourish and grow.
Yeah, we're definitely focused now, like strategically, on priming and getting ready for going back to in-person connections. I think especially after this past 18 months, it's even more instrumental that we do it safely and not do it until we're ready to do it, and of course, always following public health guidelines. I'm a public health policy analyst. I wouldn't do it any other way. But I think people are really desperate to get back into person.
Absolutely. So if you, so sorry to ask you this number off the top of your head, but do you know around about how many, because I've heard it quoted before, and I don't know what the number was, but there's some number out there that talks about how many women who have been positively affected by by She Recovers. Do you have a statistic that you can share on that, or?
Basically what we have numbers, right? So we have outputs and inputs, but we have a following of about 270,000 on Facebook.
Wow.
But because of Facebook, that doesn't always mean a lot because of the algorithms. And, I wish Facebook would take a little bit of time and do something to support nonprofits that are providing life-giving services instead of trying to, hold us back and trying to make us pay if we want to help somebody. Yep. Mike Zuckerberg or Mark or whatever your name is. Yep. I'm sure he loves being called Mike. But within our community, so our Facebook group itself, we've had about 2,000 people in it. It started in January 2018. So over 2 years, we had grown it to about 2,000, maybe 2,300 by last March. We're now over 9,000 women in that community. And I would say that, it's a very active and engaged community. So I'd say there are thousands of kind of actively engaged women in there, and non-binary individuals. And then our other groups, our smaller groups also have their own kind of flavor and their own communities. When we do our Mental Health Mondays, we usually have 100 people accessing it when it's live, but then it goes up on our YouTube channel. So the reach is actually thousands of people can
That's awesome.
access those things. We also, we have, for instance, we have a series coming up again with Pathlight mood and anxiety disorders. We're doing skills building sessions, free. The first one is on building skills for anxiety. The second is building skills for depression. The third is building skills for grief. They're being held one in September, then in October, then in December. And, there's probably about 200 people signed up for each session. And we're actually just starting to market the sections now. So, we get kind of, as soon as we tell this little Facebook group of 9,000 that we're doing something, we get a little bit of attention. And then when we get out and start doing our marketing, I like to think that, we're affecting thousands and thousands of people. And we believe,
so great.
I believe that when women heal, families heal. And when, we're, because of my daughter's story and my story, we are extremely interested in healing intergenerational trauma. And, we're the epitome of that, right? That's our story.
Well, speaking of that, let's dive into it. I would love to talk about where your story began. And, I love that you mentioned the intergenerational trauma because, my gosh, so very many of us have that, have either are working through it, don't even know it's there, or, have done, so much work to make it through.
It's really, it's kind of, it's Taryn's passion is intergenerational trauma, healing from it, and intergenerational wisdom as well. So she focuses a lot on that. And she certainly brought that to our organization and to our family. I always say it's so fun going on retreat with your kid when all she wants to talk about is intergenerational trauma. Like, I'm lying on the beach, leave me alone. I don't want to talk about my grandfather anymore. But I guess, our story is like so many people's stories, right? There was dysfunction in my past, and I can trace it back. I won't take it back as far as I can trace it, but in my lifetime, my grandfather, or not before, just before I was born, so not in my lifetime, in my mother's lifetime, her father went off to war, the Second World War, and he went off a lovely, gentle banjo playing artist, and he came back a raging alcoholic drug addict with a temper, and he physically abused my grandmother in front of my mother and her brother, and she grew up in family violence. So it was very, very difficult for her, and so that translated into her in our family. For her, it was like she wasn't going to put up with any of that in our family.
Right.
Yeah. And so in my own family, my parents, it's so hard for me to judge other people and to talk about other people, but there was a lot of drinking in our family, in our extended family. It was always every weekend. It was the aunts and the cousins, and it was great, actually. It was fun. I think that's where I learned that, substances make people happy. This is a good thing. Right. I should remember this. And in my own dad's case, who I love dearly, he's 90 years old, and he's just he's awesome. But growing up, he has anxiety, he has OCD, he has a lot of things that he wouldn't probably admit to having. And he was very miserable all of the time, except on the weekend, when he would have a few beer or a few rum and coke and let loose and relax. And then he was funny dad, happy dad. I used to joke, you can joke with dad about being bald from about Friday at 6 till Saturday at 10 at night, but don't do it on Sunday or Monday. And so we just grew up in a family that there was no violence. My mother wouldn't have stood for it. It was just always this simmering anxiety and tension, and added to that, my parents had some marital problems. And so, just grew up in that pressure cooker family, right? Where, say nothing, don't be invisible, don't say anything, keep quiet, don't laugh. I remember, we couldn't laugh at the dinner table, or my dad would tell us to be quiet and eat, we couldn't do anything. It was just, we were so oppressed and suppressed. So when my parents' marital issues kind of got a little bit out of control, and they broke up for a period of time. They did get back together and work together until my mom died 20 years ago. I was 16 years old, and I needed to get out of my house. And so I quit school. I ran away to the Yukon, of all places. If you know Alaska, the Yukon is right beside it. I was 16 years old. I wasn't prepared to live as an adult. And I ended up hooking up with some friends who were much older than I was and doing things that were dangerous. So I was all of a sudden thrown into the world of drug dealers and drug users. And I became a drug dealer and a drug user myself. And for me, you know, at 16, I became addicted extremely quickly. By the time I was 17, I was overdosing in and out of hospital. And by the time I was
Did you have
18,
a specific drug of choice that
you know, at
you were
the
addicted
time, it was actually more pills. I used a lot of Mandrix and
to?
Valium. So, and alcohol, mixing with
Mm-hmm.
alcohol and other drugs. I never liked psychedelics. But I did start to like cocaine a lot when I was
Mm-hmm.
18. So cocaine was probably it. I had, you know, I had a brief dance with heroin, and then one of my best friends overdosed on heroin beside me, and that was good enough for me.
Yeah.
Um, but it really was a lot of pills and alcohol, and always marijuana, like just always cannabis. So by the time I was 18, my life was such a mess already in 2 years, and I somehow had the wherewithal to know that I didn't want that life. And so I began my journey of trying to control my using and couldn't do it. So 18 to 20 was a disaster. Um, you know, then I started attempting suicide because I just felt so out of control and my life was so
Mm-hmm.
chaotic. And then when I was 20, I got pregnant, and it just was something that I had not planned. But I was faced with this choice, you know, am I going to really do something about my issues, or am I not going to have a child? Like what's it going to be? And I decided I wanted to have that child, and I had her. She turned 40 this year. Her name is Ashley. And, you know, that was not the end of my using, but it was the end of my daily using. It was the end of my really, really um, dangerous living. It was the beginning of my binge kind of my binge using, right? So I could go months. I went through my pregnancy, most of my pregnancy without using, not all of it. I didn't use drugs, but I did drink, and I drank to excess, probably 4 or 5 times against my will. I didn't want to. It's just I didn't have any control.
Yeah.
And then for the next couple of years, just really, again, tried not to use. And then I ended up in a relationship with a drug dealer, and we had a child who is Taryn, who's the co-founder of She Recovers. And he had a serious cocaine problem. Well, I guess I did too, but I could always blame it on him more. And he would get violent. So it was cocaine induced violence, but he would get violent, and that happened a number of times. So again, I was just, you know, we were together for less than 2 years after Taryn was born, and I trying not to use drugs, now trying not to be in a relationship where I could potentially get killed. And I just decided that I needed help. And what that happened for us was my ex ended up in the hospital in drug-induced psychosis. And during that period of time in the hospital, he was assigned, they wouldn't let him leave the hospital until he saw a drug counselor. And so I went with him to see this drug counselor. And they told him, not only do you have to give up cocaine, but you can't drink or smoke pot anymore. So he walked out, like he was out of there.
Yeah.
And I was there. I was left there, and I was, well, I can probably help him. So I'll keep coming to see you, because I do, codependency is a thing with me. So I stayed seeing that therapist for 6 months, and several months in, she just turned to me one day and said, I know we keep talking about your ex-husband and his problem, but I don't even remember what he looks like. And I wonder if we could take a moment to talk about your problem with substances. And honestly, Patrick, it was just like in that moment, I was like, part of me was like, oh my God, I'm busted. I can't keep, you know, fooling her or me or anybody else.
Mm-hmm.
And in the other part of it was like a huge relief that we were going to focus on me and, you know, what had happened to me. And so I made a deal with her that I told her, of course, because I'd quit so often. I said, listen, I can stop and never use again. Don't even worry about me. I've done it so many times. I'll just do it and I won't start again. Like I know I can do it. And she made me promise that if I couldn't, that I would go to treatment for 28 days. And I said yes. And I promised that I would be honest about it. And 2 weeks later, I was in front of her crying and saying, I couldn't stop. I need to go to treatment. I went to treatment.
Wow.
In July 1987, and I have not used cocaine or drank alcohol or taken pills recreationally since. And that was the beginning of my recovery. I was introduced to 12-step recovery. I went to a 12-step recovery for alcohol for 2 years off and on, but I was smoking pot the whole time. And I remember sharing that at a meeting, and this old timer came up to me at the end and said, "Hey, we don't talk about that around here." And I was like, you know what? That's perfect. That's perfect. But as it turned out, I actually got wired to pot, which I thought nobody gets wired to pot, but I was so wired to it that I ended up back in treatment to get off of it.
Wow.
So
Yeah.
2 years later, May 1989, I went to treatment, and it just addressed, some other things, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
And since then, I've used drugs to change how I feel once, 21 years ago, when my mother passed away. And for one day, I took her leftover pills, and I took them as prescribed, which I remember talking to a friend of mine in a program, a 12-step recovery program for people in addiction. And I said, but I took them as prescribed. And just the look on her face, I was like, yeah, no, I know. I took them to change how I felt. But
Yeah.
so when I'm a member, and if I go to those meetings and I talk about my clean time, I say I have 21 years. And when I talk about my recovery journey, I say, I have 34, with most of that completely abstinent. And that works for me.
I think it's so important that, oh goodness, I love that you shed some light on that there, because I got sober. I'm also in recovery myself, and I got sober in the 12-step community, and went through a great program it was very well, it was a 12-step immersion program, and it's what saved my life. But there's abstinence is obviously important for people that are in recovery, but we're learning more and more that about the stigma, and if we're going to break it, that we have to be using language and coming from a place of understanding and compassion when it comes to the recovery journey, rather than putting so much emphasis on clean time, because if we're talking about a disease, things go in and out of remission, and it doesn't mean so
I'm with you 3,000%. I mean, it's I've seen more people die in the last 3 decades. Sorry. I guess we'll have an edit.
Cue for the water.
I completely agree. I think that I've seen more people die from their addiction because they were so ashamed of having used, and we're kind of set up to shame them in a sense in some programs, right? So She Recovers isn't an abstinence-based program because we're not a substance use only program. We're everything.
Right.
I generally say to women, when I'm talking about what we're about, we're all in recovery from something. And I say the thing you think you're in recovery from is really not what it's really your coping mechanism and your solution to hiding and to, what you're trying to numb. So you may think it's wine. The wine is just your coping mechanism. So let's get to the trauma or the anxiety or the underlying things. So that as long as we're healing and on our healing journey, if you do pick up a glass of wine again, it's just natural. It's nothing to be ashamed of. And although abstinence is my pathway, it's definitely what I've chosen. It doesn't mean it's right for everybody. I certainly have friends who are IV drug, opioid users who now just smoke pot, and that is their harm reduction method. And I celebrate them. So yeah, I mean, I could go off on a whole other tangent about that, but
I know. Same. And it's again, it's been an interesting journey, I think, for many of us who come from abstinence-based 12-step, coming out of a mentality that just because it's worked for so many of us and a majority in decades past, doesn't necessarily mean this exact pattern and way is how everybody has to do it. And
especially because I'm sure, Patrick, in your own experience, like mine, I witnessed it not working for so many people.
Yeah.
But when they walk out the door and they have nothing else to go to, then that's when it's critical, right? So we have 10 intentions and guiding principles for She Recovers. And one of them is that we have to be supported to find and follow individualized pathways and patchworks of recovery. So we're always having that conversation. We're always having the conversation that my recovery doesn't need to look like yours. At the same time, we say we support all pathways and criticize none. So we don't allow bashing of 12-step programs in our communities.
Would you share all of those with, I'd love to hear the 10.
Do you want me to read them? Sure.
Yes.
I know them off by heart, but just this will be faster. The first one is we're all recovering from something. Pretty straightforward. The second is we don't have to hit rock bottom to pursue recovery in any area of our lives. We believe in early intervention. And I think this speaks directly to this idea that, you know, we don't have to be faced with jails, institutions, and death to make a decision that we really want to change our life and change our family's trajectory as well. So we believe very much in that. And as a healthcare policy analyst, you know, I always say, like, we're all about early intervention, except with addiction. And then we wait till somebody is like hanging off of a bridge before we give them help. Like it's, you know, another kind of thing that I talk a lot about. Third is we must be supported to find and follow individualized pathways and patchworks of recovery. 4, recovery is a journey to wholeness. We learn to take care of our body, mind, emotions, and spirit, just like a holistic pathway, right? And this is, Taryn brings a lot of embodiment practices into our community, and trauma-informed yoga and essential oils and all sorts of other wonderful things. Number 5 is we answer the call to heal our past wounds and intergenerational traumas so we can live fully in the present. So we really try to be a very trauma respondent organization. Like, we're set up we have guidelines, and we have 3 people leading each online meeting. One is a professional recovery coach that's always the facilitator. Then there's a co-host and a guardian, and they're just guarding the space and making sure that everybody is, you know, I don't want to say behaving, because of course they do behave, but they answer questions. You know, they're there to encourage. If somebody is having an issue, they're there to help, you know, whether that means taking things offline or not. 6 is we focus on our strengths, not our defects. This is how we change. And I will admit that is a complete nod to my own experience in 12-step recovery. Initially, I learned afterwards that it was just my experience, not everybody's, but I did feel in the first couple of years, like, I walked into recovery thinking that I was just one big defect. And then the focus on defects in the program, I couldn't hear anything except that. The defects. And, you know, I had the experience of the first time I did a 4th and 5th step with my sponsor. She was a young mom, and we started off with all my defects. So like 3 hours of my defects. And then she had to go because the baby was not doing well. And I left there without having had a chance to say anything about an asset for like, it took 3 weeks before we got back together. And it was traumatic for me. You know, I was living in this place of defects. So, I just believe in strength-based practice. And I believe that in recovery, we lead with our strengths, right? So when women in our community come on and go, we try and get them off the whole, it's day one again. It's, you know, I was sober for 70 days, or, you know, I didn't do Coke for 60 days. And then last night I used, and now it's all gone. And we really try to say, let's just build on the 60 or 70 days. If you could do it for 60 or 70, let's just focus on that. Don't focus on last night, or you're for sure going to use again today and tomorrow. Like, let's just celebrate what you did accomplish. And it does change women's thinking about themselves. So the next one is we understand that the practice of radical self-love is paramount to our well-being. And that's really a lot about self-care. And, you know, we talk about self-care in our community, in our meetings a lot. And we don't mean bubble baths and treating yourself necessarily. We mean learning boundaries, you know, understanding how important it is to take care of like our schedule, you know, time management, kind of boundaries is a really big thing. I think learning how to set boundaries is the greatest form of self-care that we can practice.
Amen.
So,
yeah.
Next is we do our individual work in order to create and hold healing spaces for everyone. All women deserve recovery. And this is really about just in March last year, March and April, in our meetings, we were able to provide support to everyone who was like, we were all going like, what's a pandemic? Like, what does this mean? Oh my gosh, why are my kids here every day? Why aren't they in school? Like, how can I do this? And then in May, with the murder of George Floyd, we had a whole new, you know, we were kind of just settling into the pandemic. And now we had all the unrest and the trauma around the George Floyd killing. And we recognized that in our community, which is predominantly white, that we needed to do some work, and we needed to do some work as an organization. We needed to do some work to ensure that the women of color in our community did feel safe and supported. And we needed to encourage women in our community to do their own anti-racism work. So we were very fortunate. A wonderful coach who works with us, she's a She Recovers coach. Sherry Hampton is her name. And we worked with her. We supported her and hired a consultant to work with her to develop an anti-racism training specifically for recovery spaces. And she's actually at Mobilized Recovery in Las Vegas this weekend, and she'll be offering that training there. She offers it to our community. It's mandatory for our volunteers and our coaches and our yoga teachers. And at that, around the same time, that's when we started our She Recovers support for Black, Indigenous, and women of color group, because women in our community said they just wanted to be in a space where they could process what was going on without having to worry about anybody else figuring out what they should or shouldn't be talking about. They didn't, so, and that's been just wonderful. Then we ended up doing a critical conversation webinar with Sherry and some other of our coaches, called Healing the Effects of Racism for Black Women in Recovery, which was really awesome. Excuse me, I'm going to cough again.
Oh, you're fine.
I talk too much. And then the last two, one is When We're Ready, We Recover Out Loud, so that women who are struggling can find and join our movement. This is really important to us. We really do encourage people to recover out loud, but the key term there is when we're ready.
Yeah.
So I know so many of us who kind of find recovery. I don't know if you were like this, but I remember before I even went into treatment, telling my family doctor, if you ever want anybody to talk about recovery, give me a call.
Excuse me.
And I hadn't even been to treatment yet. Like, I was just there to get a physical to go into treatment. And I can still see his kind of smile going, yeah, I'll keep that in mind. But, and then the last is connection is our soul purpose. And then soul, SOLE, SOUL, purpose, we're stronger together. And that's just about our kind of philosophy that we just need one other person in our life to believe in us and support. Like, that's a connection. And as an organization, we need to collaborate with organizations like yours and others, that we're stronger together, regardless of if we're in a 12-step program or we're doing Dharma recovery, or if we're doing, what Life Bring, or any of the other wonderful modalities out there, we shouldn't pick and choose and kind of highlight one over the other. Our job as an organization and as women in recovery is to support other women to figure out what works for them. So we're not a program. We like to see ourselves as as an umbrella over all the beautiful things out there that women can access.
Gosh, I love that. I love it. It takes the ego out of it. And I think that's one of the most important things when we're looking at creating positive, safe change. And I love that last piece that you talked, number 10, which it kind of jives with our promises. We every year do our own, theme for National Recovery Month, which I forgot to mention at the beginning of this episode. I'm so grateful and glad that we are closing out National Recovery Month with your episode. We've been so excited to highlight She Recovers, and our theme this year is Together We Are the Change. Yeah. And it couldn't be more true. We talk about the opposite of addiction and sickness is connection, and it's not just the individual, it's the people providing care, the people providing solution. We have to band together and work together to, fill in the gaps and identify where we're missing it. Because just like, I hear you talking about how, your career has evolved and your desire to help and how it's changed, and even the evolution of She Recovers, in the field of the helping field, the field of what we're all doing to promote wholeness in the individual, how we do it, how we get there, and even in some ways, when we look at what wholeness is considered and viewed as now versus what it was viewed as 10 years ago, And that piece, I think we have the ability to continue to advance so much quicker together.
It's so important, Patrick. And I think about my own experience, even just growing up in recovery, in the first decade, where I would meet people. I was in NA. I guess I'll say it. I think everybody knows what I'm talking about. I was in NA.
Yeah.
Some of my best friends were in Nar-Anon. Like women friends were in Nar-Anon. But we couldn't go to they could come, we could go to each other's kind of conferences or conventions, but we were always the other at each other's we were never, there was never anything where we could be together at a camp out. But if we were going to do education and learning, it was like you were either the family member or you were the person in recovery. And that's a barrier that needs to be broken down, right? I mean, I'm very happy that in my own work, in my own consulting work right now, looking at a lot of solutions in the addictions field where we're trying to move even treatment programs themselves in the direction of family-centered treatment, right? Because, I had wonderful treatment for 28 days, but then I went back home into a back into a house where my partner was still using and had no desire not to use. And it's just we've got to break down this siloed approach, whether that's, I also said the same about myself. I had anxiety. I was recovering from violence. I was recovering from drugs. I had trauma from my childhood that I'd never addressed. And I didn't have time to go to 4 different programs for all of those things. Right. I needed to go somewhere where I could just come and go, this is how I'm feeling today. This is what I need today. And, where can I go to get these other pieces? But I needed somewhere where I could be a whole person, where I could bring my whole big piece of luggage with all of the issues and not parse out little bits here and there and tell this therapist part of the story and another one over here. Yep. So I appreciate so much. And I've seen what Promises does in particular by focusing on the whole individual and the need to engage with everybody within kind of an individual's realm.
Absolutely. Well, and as you were reading the tenets of your program, I keep thinking about how it's kind of how we've shaped what I do at Promises. I'm in the marketing department, but I oversee our alumni program, and there are so many similarities between how you were describing, how the forming approach to recovering the whole person and everything that we've attempted to do with our aftercare alumni services. And I'm hoping that we see more and more programs and approaches pop up or transition, to that approach rather than the one size fits all.
Well, we'll be in community. I mean, we're in, I know that you're kind of spread out all over the place, but we have a community already in Nashville. We have one in Atlanta. We have them in Denver. We have them all over the place. So, and that's the idea, right? That these in-person communities will be doing educational evenings where we'll be drawing people from the community, including experts and clinicians, service providers, other nonprofits, and having conversations about how do we support families in our community, regardless of what they're recovering from.
So beautiful. Well, okay. So I've got a couple questions for you. How can people get involved with She Recovers, learn more information?
Yeah, we have our website is packed full with information. So if you go to our website, which is www.sherecovers.org, if you look under online programs, you will see a link to our daily gatherings, and you can go to that page and it'll give you our schedule of all our meetings, including the ones on the weekend for the specialty populations, and a link that takes you right to the group. So right through to the Zoom. You do need to be an authorized Zoom user, and there are some questions that you have to answer if you ask to be admitted to any of our Facebook groups. The information about our Mental Health Mondays and our skills building series, etc., will be on there. Oh, Mental Health Mondays is already there. Skills building will be up early next week. There's information about our retreats, which are currently all filled out. We're all filled up. We're doing a few, we've just kind of put our feet back into. I'm heading off to Maine in a couple of weeks to facilitate 2 small 12-person healthcare retreats
Awesome.
for healthcare professionals. You'll find access to our yoga there. You'll find out everything we're up to. You'll see how you can donate to our current fundraising campaign, which is called Unite to Ignite. We have a wonderful donor who's matching the first $30,000 of donations, so we're excited about that. There's everything is pretty well on there, and you can access. If you have any questions, I believe you can just email admin@sherecovers.org. And your questions will be directed.
Facebook and are you on Facebook and Instagram? I know you.
We're also on Facebook, She Recovers, and on Instagram, She Recovers. We're on LinkedIn, She Recovers Foundation.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Very cool. Awesome. All right. My last question for you is for that person that is listening or watching today, who really feels like they can relate, or just something got them. And listening to your story, what would be that last bit of encouragement you'd like to leave with them today?
I would want to say to them what I always wanted to hear, and what eventually I have heard over the years, right? Which is, you do not have to do this alone. Mm-hmm. There's nothing inherently wrong with you. Some things happened to you that may have been influencing your behavior in the recent or even distant past. You're not a bad person. What I'm known best for, one of the things that people repeat often that I said a few years ago, and it kind of stuck, was, excuse me, I'm going to say one bad word. The shit you did is just the shit you did. It's not who you are. And so if shame, or if you're hesitating because of shame, or you think that you've done things that nobody else has ever done, first of all, you're probably wrong. There's probably a lot of people have done it, but don't let any of those thoughts keep you from reaching out for help. And if you come to our community, there's no expectations on what you're going to do. You can come and hang out, keep your video off on our calls. You won't be called upon to share. You can just listen to hear how other women are healing. But yeah, the main thing is you don't have to recover alone.
So beautiful. All right. I know I think that the last thing I said to you was a lie. That was my last question, but I just did think of one other one that I want to ask you. What was it like to meet Glennon Doyle?
Glennon was awesome. She was there with Abby. So, and I actually interviewed her. We did a fireside chat on the stage. Awesome. She was wonderful. And they got married actually the next weekend. And we didn't know that at the time.
That's so cool.
It was as wonderful as meeting Elizabeth Vargas, who had just released her book, Between Breaths, which is just a beautiful memoir about alcoholism and anxiety. And I did an interview with her on the stage too. Marianne Williamson just never disappoints. And then in LA, we had Cheryl Strayed was one of our keynote speakers, and Ashley Judd is going to be our keynote speaker in Miami. One of them.
Oh, how awesome.
As well as Jennifer Pasteloff, who people may not know, but they'll know her soon. And Nadia Boltz-Weber, another really inspirational woman. So they're all women in recovery from something or other. And it's going to be a great time in Miami. And we still do have some spots left for Miami, but we're just about sold out.
Love it. Yeah. Very cool. All right. Well, I'm going to close out with my favorite saying that I can't say. I don't own it. I stole it from somebody else, but I think it packs a punch and is so powerful that it is never too late to start loving yourself. And you are only one decision away from a completely different life. So
love it.
Yeah. I know. Isn't that great?
So good.
Yeah. So thank you again so much, Dawn.
It's been my pleasure, Patrick. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. With that, we are out.
For more information on today's episode, check out the show notes. Recovery Stories is brought to you by Promises Behavioral Health's Rooted alumni community. If you or a loved one are struggling, have questions, or ready to take the next step, call our admission center at 888-648-4098. Or visit us online at www.promisesbehavioralhealth.com. Our team is ready and waiting to answer the call for help. Whether you're watching on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, or listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, please share with your friends. Follow, subscribe, and leave us a review. We are grateful for you and hope that you have been encouraged by today's episode. As always, remember you are only one decision away from a completely different life, and it is never too late to start loving yourself.